Could anyone have survived inside the Chernobyl disaster reactor after it exploded? And if they did, what would their final moments have looked like? In this video, we're going to uncover the terrifying reality of what happened to anyone trapped inside the reactor building that night. To understand whether survival was even possible, we first have to understand what actually happened inside Reactor 4 in the seconds after the explosion. Because this wasn't just a normal explosion, it was something far worse. At 1:23 a.m., a sudden power surge triggered a catastrophic failure inside the reactor core. Fuel rods shattered, pressure built instantly, and within seconds, two massive explosions ripped through the building. The 1,000-ton concrete lid covering the reactor was blown into the air like it weighed nothing. The roof collapsed, walls tore open, and the core itself, burning at temperatures hotter than molten lava, was exposed directly to the night sky. But here's where things become difficult to imagine. Unlike a fire, or even a chemical explosion, this disaster released something invisible: radiation. And not just small amounts. Lethal, concentrated radiation poured out of the exposed core, flooding every corridor, every staircase, and every room inside the building. Which raises the question, if anyone was still inside after the explosion, could they have survived, even for a few minutes? The first and most immediate possibility is that some workers survived the initial blast, and in fact, we know they did. Operators, engineers, and firefighters were still inside the plant in the moments after the explosion, trying to understand what had just happened. But what they didn't realize was that the environment around them had already become deadly. In some areas near the reactor core, radiation levels reached over 30,000 roentgens per hour. To put that in perspective, a dose or just 500 roentgens is enough to kill a human being. This was dozens of times higher. For anyone standing close to the exposed core, death didn't come slowly. It came within minutes. Their bodies absorbed massive amounts of radiation almost instantly. Cells began to break apart. Internal organs started shutting down before they even understood what they were exposed to. Some reported a metallic taste in their mouths. Others described a sudden wave of heat, not from fire, but from radiation passing through their bodies. In this scenario, survival wasn't really survival at all. It was a delayed death already set in motion. But what about those who were farther away from the core? Could someone deeper inside the building, perhaps in a control room or hallway, have survived longer? This is where things become more complicated, because radiation doesn't behave like fire or smoke. You can't see it, you can't smell it, and in many cases, you don't even feel it right away. It simply passes through walls, floors, and human bodies alike. Workers moving through the building that night would have had no clear sense of where it was safe and where it wasn't. They might have believed they were escaping danger while unknowingly walking deeper into it. In these areas, survival could have lasted longer, maybe several minutes, possibly even an hour, but the damage was still happening. With every breath, radioactive particles entered their lungs. With every second, their cells absorbed more energy than they could withstand. And then the symptoms began: dizziness, weakness, confusion, followed by vomiting, severe burns, and a rapid collapse of the immune system. Even those who made it out of the building alive would later die from acute radiation sickness. So while they technically survived the explosion, they never escaped it. But there's an even darker possibility. What if someone had been trapped in a more isolated part of the reactor building, a place shielded from the initial blast, a room that remained structurally intact? Could they have avoided the worst of the radiation, at least for a while? At first, it might seem possible. Thick concrete walls could block some radiation. Distance from the core could reduce exposure. In theory, someone in the right place might have experienced lower levels, enough to stay conscious and alive longer than others. But this kind of survival comes with its own kind of horror. Because in these spaces, the danger wouldn't be immediate. It would be slow, uncertain, and impossible to detect. They would be surrounded by silence, darkness, maybe distant sounds of collapsing metal or burning debris, and all the while, radiation would still be seeping in, not enough to kill instantly, but enough to ensure that survival was only temporary. Minutes would turn into hours, and with each passing moment, the damage inside their body would grow worse. Their skin might begin to redden, as if sunburned from within. Their strength would fade, their thoughts would become harder to hold on to, and eventually, even if they managed to escape later, the outcome would already be sealed.
But perhaps the most terrifying possibility is what happened in the areas closest to the core, after the explosion, but before the full collapse of the structure. Because for a brief period, parts of the building still stood, and inside those areas, conditions became almost impossible to survive. Chunks of radioactive graphite, pieces of the reactor core itself, were scattered across the floors. Some of these fragments emitted radiation so intense that standing near them for even a minute could be fatal. And yet, firefighters and workers unknowingly approached them. Some even picked them up, not realizing that what they were touching was delivering a lethal dose directly into their bodies. In these moments, survival wasn't determined by strength or awareness. It came down to pure chance. Where you stood, what you touched, how long you stayed. And for many, that difference was only a matter of seconds. So could anyone have survived inside the reactor building after the explosion? The answer is yes, but only briefly and never without consequence. Some survived minutes, others survived hours. A few even made it out alive. But for those who were closest to the core, for those exposed to the highest levels of radiation, survival ended almost as quickly as the explosion itself. No sound, no warning, just the silent, invisible force of radiation tearing through everything in its path. And for those who lasted longer, the end was slower, more uncertain, but no less inevitable. In the end, the reactor didn't just explode, it turned the entire building into an environment where survival was only temporary, and escape didn't mean safety, because once you were exposed, the outcome had already been decided.